Oh, here we are. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Open Innovation Thursday. We are moving forward, learning every week in 15 minutes bites each week. We have an interesting conversation about each of the 57 chapters of the Oxford Handbook of Open Innovation. My name is Marisol Menendez. I'm an open innovation enthusiast, and I'm having the best time of my life learning and get to know such amazing people as are the authors of the Oxford Handbook of Open Innovation. Today, we are in chapter number 14, and today we are talking with Hans Frankort, who is author of this chapter. Welcome. How are you, Hans?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Marisol. Thank you for organizing this series, and thank you for having us today.
Thank you very much for connecting. Where are you connecting from?
I'm connecting from the city of London, from my office.
It's very nice. I'm connecting from Bilbao today, and
All
it's
right.
very joyful that we are connecting and talking about open innovation, which is our passion. So the very first thing we like to do always is first ask you to introduce yourself.
Right. So I'm Hans Frankort. I'm a professor of strategy at Base Business School at City University of London, where I've been since 2009, so for coming up 15 years now. Before that, I did my PhD at the School of Business and Economics at Maastricht University. And the topic of that PhD dissertation was around research and development alliances, which happens to be the topic of the chapter we're discussing today.
It's amazing. So let's get to the chapter. You wrote that chapter together with John Hagedorn. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. Sorry.
Perfect,
And the
perfect.
topic is R&D, Alliances and Open Innovation, Review and Opportunities. That's the title. So
Yes.
how did you came to write this chapter in the book? How did John and you came up with the idea? What's the story behind the chapter?
All right. So I should perhaps introduce John. So you may have noticed in the first chapter of the handbook, Henry spoke about the antecedents of the open innovation paradigm. And one important antecedent was a empirical literature about research and development alliances. And John, my co-author, happens to be one of the earliest and most impactful scholars to have studied research and development alliances. And so he was invited to contribute a chapter. And so that answers why John is in the handbook. Now, why he invited me to join remains a question. I can only assume he enjoys working with me and that will be mutual. Though, of course, I'm a student of research and development alliances myself. So once we decided to work together, we decided to do actually a sort of a structured review of the research and development alliance literature, with the idea that R&D alliances are one open innovation practice, and not so much is known in an integrative way about what has been studied in this literature. And moreover, how the study of research and development alliances relates to the study of other open innovation practices. And so that was our motivation to begin a structured review of the literature.
This is amazing. I love also like great teams that come together to open interesting topics as this. And so let's get into the chapter. What is this chapter about?
So the chapter is about the open innovation practice of research and development alliances, which are formal agreements between firms with the objective to conduct joint research and development. And so these alliances are just one way for firms to engage in external collaboration. And so, of course, there's large literature about why these research and development alliances exist, and also why some of them are more successful than others. And so these are the first two themes in our review. More interestingly, from an open innovation perspective, perhaps, is how the research and development alliance literature has actually considered other open innovation practices. And that's the third theme in our chapter. And there we see some interesting things, which I'll be happy to detail if you like.
Yes, please go ahead with the discoveries.
Yeah, so we came into this chapter knowing about the first two themes, and we had some kind of hunch about the third theme. We thought that not so many early R&D Alliance studies had actually looked at other open innovation practices. And once we started coding the literature, it turns out that from the very start, the first empirical article in our sample is in 1990. From the start, other open innovation practices were actually studied. And they were studied in three different ways. And so the first is, okay, here is the innovation performance of a company, and that is some function of the company's R&D alliances, plus the company's other open innovation practices. And so it's a very additive approach. And so a good example of this would be a paper by Eamon Salter, who you had in your series earlier, and Kel Lawson, that looks at the performance of firms as a function of the number of open innovation practices, among which R&D alliances. And so a second stream of that literature has said, okay, let's imagine we have an innovation project. Now, how are we going to organize that project? Are we going to engage in informal collaborations, or are we going to formalize it into an R&D alliance? So that part of the literature has actually looked at R&D alliances and other practices as substitutes, as mutually exclusive ways to govern a project, basically.
Interesting.
Okay. The third and final part of that literature, it's also sort of the smallest part of the literature, and we think that's a problem, has looked at how R&D alliances and other open innovation practices may be complementing one another or substituting one another in their effect on outcomes. Among the 250 odd papers we reviewed, we could only identify 4 papers that have actually looked at those interdependencies. And that brings us to what future research might look at.
Interesting. So I find it very interesting to be aware of the different kind of relationships as you were just displaying in these 3 types, because also during the practice, there are different dynamics. And as we learned with Amon, even within an organization, not every project needs to be treated similarly, you know? So
Yeah.
this, and in these R&D alliances, there's also this flow of knowledge that we are organizing and settling. Do you have any advice or discoveries for practitioners that came from your research?
So the full disclosure, our chapter is unashamedly academic. However, we have the open innovation practitioner keenly in mind. And I say this for the following reason. R&D Alliance scholars, John and myself included, we're often interested in what is the effect of this research and development alliance. And we're sort of trying to ignore everything else around it. A practitioner has different questions in their mind. They may ask questions like, how do we improve performance? And so which vehicles, which practices do we need to adopt to make that happen? And so it's the question in reverse, essentially. And so we tried to use that lens to look at the literature and observe that the practitioner's question hasn't as often been answered. And so our advice is essentially to reverse the question and say, okay, how do R&D alliances interact with other open innovation practices in determining relevant outcomes for firms? Because this is what practitioners would like to know about. They would like to know where these R&D alliances should sit in their business model.
Exactly.
They don't typically begin with an R&D alliance and then think about what to do with it. They will choose that R&D alliance as a strategic option to achieve a certain end. And so the insights we hope that future research may provide would be along the lines of the themes just outlined.
That's so interesting. And so for our fellow academic viewers today, you discovered an interesting area of research, no? And any specific call to action you want them to have in their minds just to research?
Yeah, so I think we would all benefit from thinking a bit more broadly about the phenomena we're studying. And so the phenomenon for us would have been an R&D alliance, but that R&D alliance is just one vehicle to achieve relevant outcomes. And so perhaps if we would like to give better advice, more useful advice to practitioners, we may need to study systematically how different open innovation practices interact with one another, either because they strengthen one another or because they subtract from one another. Maybe two different practices are really achieving the same thing, and so maybe you don't need both. But maybe if you have one practice, an R&D alliance, then another practice, an alliance with the university, for example, may out of that R&D. These kinds of questions that are more about the portfolio of open innovation practices, its relation to outcomes, we believe are understudied, at least in the literature we reviewed, and they are important to practitioners, and so they should be important to us academics.
Perfect. And can you repeat the last phrase, because it got a little bit cut and I will edit later on. So the last, you can repeat the last conclusion and we can.
Okay, so
it was about the conclusion, the advice for academics, no? To make sure that we provide good advice.
Yeah, so as academics, we would benefit from broadening our perspective a bit beyond the individual practice, which the portfolio of practices that are potentially available to practitioners, and how these individual practices within the portfolio would interact to
oh, Hans, I lost you.
About how to manage their portfolio.
Sorry, I don't know what's happening. It's the phantom that of the phantom of the conclusions. Goblin that doesn't want you to record your conclusions. I don't know what's happening. I'm supposed.
See.
Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well. Yes. I see your screen breaks up sometimes. Just trying to see if.
I think we're okay right now. Let's make the best of this time and go ahead. And so I can repeat. Well, thank you very much for your advice for practitioners. What can we tell, what advice do you have for academics then?
For academics would be to broaden our horizons a little bit and think beyond the individual practice in which we happen to be interested about the portfolio of practices. And of course, practitioners are interested in how they should manage a portfolio to achieve desirable outcomes. And if it's important to practitioners, then that means it should be important to us as academics.
This is amazing. You know, one of the things that we work a lot in the World Open Innovation Conference is to bring academia and practice together. I think this book is also a very nice exercise of mixing both worlds as well. And I think R&D is especially an interesting area to bring both sides of it, because at the end, R&D and everything IP related and research is critical for development, for innovation, but of course, benefits a lot from the open innovation dynamics. As you will pointed out, there are different ways to achieve it, but there's always this big question mark in the practitioner side, how to do it. Now, just yesterday I was with SMEs, and SMEs who are researching things really are questioning themselves, what's the best way to address this R&D alliance? And so I think all this literature is critical to get this clearer picture. Thank you very much, because, you know, in the first conversation with Henry, he said that this book was meant to be more a Bible than a novel, in the sense that you don't need to read it back to back, no? But of course, if you have a specific question, you can go to the chapter, and this is one of the most interesting chapters related to R&D. So thank you very much for your content. Any final ideas, thoughts? call to action?
We should focus as academics on interdependencies between practices and how they affect outcomes, because that's what practitioners worry about.
Thank you very much, Hans. It's been a delight to have these 15 minutes together to discuss about R&D, the Oxford Handbook of Open Innovation, and of course, do our Open Innovation Thursdays. Next week, if everything goes well, we will see chapter number 15. And in the meantime, let's keep open innovating.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Marisol.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.